I was folding laundry when he said it. Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock. The sun came through the kitchen windows just like every other morning. I had a basket of towels on the couch. My hands were damp from the fabric softener. My daughter Lauren was at work. My granddaughter Addie was at school. And my son-in-law Mark stood in the doorway of my own living room with a coffee mug in his hand. He looked casual, almost friendly. That was the part that got me later. How normal he seemed. How he said it like he was asking me to pass the salt. A few days after our wedding, my son-in-law suddenly said that the best wedding gift would be if you disappeared from my house. I stopped folding. I thought I heard him wrong. The towel hung from my fingers, a blue one, the good ones from Target. I remember the color because my mind grabbed onto something small to keep from falling apart. I said, "What did you just say?" And he smiled. He actually smiled. Not a cruel smile, a sad one, like I was the one who didn't understand something obvious. He said, "Mom, I love you, but this is our house now, Lauren and me and Natty. You were supposed to stay for 6 months. It's been 3 years. 3 years? Yes, 3 years since I sold my condo in Phoenix. 3 years since I packed my whole life in 14 boxes and drove across the desert to live with my only daughter. 3 years since my husband Richard died and left me with a life insurance payout and a silence I couldn't breathe through."
Lauren had called me crying. She said, "Mom, come live with us. We have room. We want you here. You won't be a burden. You're my mom." I remember sobbing into the phone in my empty condo, the one Richard and I bought when we retired, the one with the view of the mountains. I sold it for $120,000 less than it was worth because I needed to move fast. I gave $40,000 to Lauren and Mark to pay off their credit cards. I put the rest in savings. I thought that was the smart thing, the mother thing. I thought I was building a home. The first year was good, really good. I felt useful. I got Addie ready for school every morning. I made breakfast, eggs and toast and cut up apples. I did the grocery shopping. I cooked dinner, meatloaf on Mondays, spaghetti on Wednesdays, roast chicken on Sundays. I did the laundry. I cleaned the bathrooms. I watered the plants. I took Addie to soccer practice and dance recitals and birthday parties. I sat with her when she had a fever and her parents were too tired to stay awake. I was the grandmother I always wanted to be. I was the mother I always wanted to be too. Lauren and I hadn't been close since she was a teenager. She had been angry those years. Angry at me for staying with Richard when he drank too much. Angry at me for not being stronger. But after Addie was born, she softened. She needed me, and I needed to be needed. That was my weakness. That was the door I left open.
The second year, I started noticing small things. Mark forgot to say thank you when I made his favorite meal. Lauren stopped sitting next to me on the couch at night. She started taking her phone into the bedroom when she got texts. I heard her voice go low. Not whispering exactly, but careful. I told myself she was just stressed from work. She was a paralegal. Long hours, difficult boss. I understood. I made her tea. I left it on the nightstand. She said, "Thanks, Mom," but she didn't look at me. The third year was the hardest. My knees started hurting. Arthritis. The doctor said it was normal for a woman my age, 68. He said, "Take ibuprofen and rest." I couldn't rest. There was too much to do. But I slowed down. I couldn't carry the laundry basket up the stairs anymore. I asked Mark to help. He said he was busy. I asked Lauren. She said she was tired. So I left the basket at the bottom of the stairs. For 3 days. Nobody moved it. Finally, I carried it up myself, one step at a time, holding the rail, my knees screaming. I cried in the hallway, quietly, so nobody would hear. That was when I started wondering if something was wrong, really wrong, not just tiredness or stress, something they weren't telling me. I remember a night in October. Mark and Lauren were in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep, but my bedroom was downstairs next to the garage, and the walls were thin. I heard Mark say, "We can't keep doing this." Lauren said, "I know." Mark said, "She's not a child. She's a grown woman. She needs to figure out her own life." Lauren said she had nowhere to go. Mark said, "That's not our problem." I laid in the dark, my hands under the blanket, my heart beating so hard I thought it might stop. I told myself he meant well. He was just worried about money, worried about space. I told myself I would try harder, be less trouble, take up less room. I started eating in my room. I stopped using the living room after 8 p.m. I stopped asking Addie to sit with me and watch movies. I didn't want to be in the way. I became a ghost in a house I had helped pay for. I had given them $40,000. I had paid for Addie's dance classes for 2 years. I had bought groceries every week. I had cooked almost every meal. I had cleaned every room. I had never asked for anything, not once. Not a single dollar, not a single thank you, not even a hug that lasted longer than 2 seconds. And still, it wasn't enough. The morning Mark said those words, I felt something detach inside me, like a rope snapping. I put down the towel. I looked at him. He was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. My bedroom, the room I had slept in for 3 years. The room where I had tucked Addie in on nights when she had nightmares. The room where I had cried myself to sleep after Richard's death. The room where I had taken my blood pressure medicine every morning and every night. He wanted me to disappear from that room. I said, Mark, I don't understand. I helped you buy this house. I co-signed the loan. My name is on the deed. He tilted his head, like I was a child saying something silly. He said, Mom, your name was on the deed. Past tense. We refinanced last year, remember? You signed the papers? I said yes, but I thought that was just for a better interest rate. He nodded. It was, but it also took your name off the deed. Lauren and I are the only owners now. You signed it, voluntarily. I remember the papers. A Tuesday afternoon. Mark came home from work early. He had a folder with him. He said, Mom, we can save $500 a month if we refinance. We just need your signature. It's just a formality. I trusted him. I signed where he pointed. I didn't read the papers. I never read the papers. I was 67 years old. My eyes were bad. My glasses were in the other room. And I trusted my daughter and her husband. That was the mistake. That was the mistake I will carry to my grave. I said, where is Lauren? Mark said, she's at work. I said, call her. He said, I don't think that's a good idea right now. I said, call my daughter. My voice broke on the word daughter. He pulled out his phone. He dialed. He put it on speaker. Lauren picked up after 2 rings. She said, hey babe, what's up? Mark said, your mom wants to talk to you. There was a pause. Then Lauren's voice came through tinny and hard. She said, Mom, please don't make this dramatic. I said, Lauren, he told me to disappear. He said my best wedding gift would be leaving your house. She said, Mom, you can't stay here forever. We need our space. I said, I have rights. I pay for things. I take care of Addie. She said, we can hire a babysitter. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I couldn't get air. I said, Lauren, I am your mother. I raised you. I held you when you were sick. I paid for your college. I gave you $40,000. I cooked for you. I cleaned for you. I loved you. And she said, I know, Mom, but that doesn't mean you get to live with us forever. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red button. Mark took the phone back. He said, we can give you 2 months to find a place. We'll help you look for an apartment, a small one, something you can afford on Social Security. I said, I have savings. He said, you have about $20,000 left. The rest went into the house, and the house is ours now. That was when I realized they had planned this. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a strategy, slow, methodical, waiting until I had spent most of my money, waiting until I had sold my condo, waiting until I had nowhere else to go, then pulling the floor out from under me. I didn't cry in front of him. I refused to give him that. I stood up. My knees hurt. I walked past him into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking. Water splashed on the counter. I drank it slowly. I watched the backyard. Addie's swing set was out there. The one I bought for her 3rd birthday. The one I assembled myself because Mark said he was too busy. The red slide was faded now. The grass needed mowing. I thought about all the hours I had spent in that yard, pushing Addie on the swing, catching her at the bottom of the slide, showing her how to plant marigolds, teaching her the names of birds. I thought about how her little hand felt in mine, soft, warm, completely trusting. I thought about how I would never hold that hand again, not after this. Not after I became the grandmother who was so unwanted she had to be evicted. I walked back to my room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed where Addie had crawled in on Saturday mornings. The same bed where Richard's photo sat on the nightstand. I picked up the photo. He was smiling. He had good eyes. Troubled, but good. He died 3 years ago. Liver failure. Too much whiskey. Too many years of drinking in the garage alone. I had stayed with him through all of it. Through the late nights. Through the broken promises. Through the mornings when he couldn't remember what he said the night before. I stayed because I believed in marriage. I stayed because I was raised to stay. I stayed because I didn't know who I was without him. And now I was 68 years old. Alone. Broke. About to be homeless. And my own daughter had just told me I couldn't live with her forever. I sat on that bed for 3 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I just sat there, counting the cracks in the ceiling, thinking about every choice that had brought me to this moment. The choice to trust Mark, the choice to sign the papers, the choice to give them my money, the choice to believe that love was the same as sacrifice, that if I gave enough, I would get enough back. But that wasn't true. It had never been true. Love didn't work that way. Love was a door you opened, and sometimes people walked through, and sometimes they walked out, and sometimes they locked it behind them. At 4 p.m., the front door opened. I heard Addie's voice. She was singing something, a song from school, something about a rainbow. I heard her drop her backpack on the floor. I heard her run to the kitchen. I heard Mark say, "Addie, go do your homework." She said, "Where's Grandma?" He said, "She's resting, don't bother her." I waited until midnight. Then I packed. Not much. Just clothes, my medications, Richard's photo, a few things Addie had made for me in art class, a clay bowl, a pipe cleaner flower, a drawing of 2 holding hands with Grandma and Addie written in crayon. I put them in a shoebox. I put the shoebox in my suitcase. I walked out the back door. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't leave a note. I got in my car, a 2015 Toyota Camry, the last thing Richard and I bought together. I drove to a Motel 6 on the edge of town, the kind with burnt coffee and stiff pillows and a smell of old cigarettes. I paid for 3 nights, $270.
I lay on the bed and I stared at a different ceiling. And I finally cried. I cried for 3 hours. I cried until my eyes were swollen and my nose was raw and my throat was sore. I cried for Richard, for the marriage that never really worked, for the years I wasted trying to fix a man who didn't want to be fixed. I cried for Lauren, for the little girl who used to hold my hand at the grocery store, for the teenager who slammed doors and called me names, for the woman who let her husband throw her mother out of the house. I cried for Addie, for the granddaughter who would grow up wondering what happened, who would hear whatever story Mark and Lauren decided to tell, who would never know how much I loved her, how I would have given everything for her, how I already had. And then I stopped crying, because I realized something. I realized that Mark and Lauren had taken my money and my house and my dignity, but they hadn't taken my mind. They hadn't taken my memories. They hadn't taken the fact that I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, I could fight back. The next morning, I called a lawyer, Margaret, 62 years old, divorced, tough as nails. I found her on a website for senior legal aid. I told her everything: the $40,000, the refinancing papers, the verbal agreement, the promises, the betrayal. She listened without saying much. Then she said, "Do you have any of this in writing? Any emails, any texts, anything?" I said, "I have the original deed from when we bought the house. I co-signed the loan. My name was on it." She said, "Do you have proof that you gave them $40,000? I said, "I wrote a check. I can get the bank records." She said, "That's good. That's something." She said, "The refinancing is tricky. You signed the papers. That makes it hard. But if you can prove coercion or deception, we might have a case."
I said, Mark told me it was just a better interest rate. He didn't tell me I was giving up ownership. Margaret said, did you ask? I said, no, I trusted him. She went quiet. Then she said, Mrs. Connolly, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be ugly. It's going to cost money you don't have, and it's going to tear your family apart if there's anything left to tear. But if you want to fight, we can fight. I said, fight. For the next 6 months, my life was a war. I moved into a studio apartment, a small place above a garage, $500 a month, included utilities. The landlord was an old man named Bill, 83, widower. His wife died of cancer 2 years ago. He didn't ask questions. He just handed me the keys and said, the stove is finicky. You have to jiggle the knob. I liked him. He didn't want anything from me. I lived on Social Security, $1,200 a month. Half went to rent, the rest went to food and medicine and the small monthly payment to Margaret. I stopped buying coffee. I stopped buying new clothes.
I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I lost 15 pounds, not from dieting, from not eating enough. My knees got worse. The apartment was up a flight of stairs. Every step was a small agony, but I climbed them every day because I had no choice. I called Lauren once, about 3 weeks after I left. She picked up. I said, I love you. And she said, Mom, why are you doing this? I said, doing what? She said, hiring a lawyer? Trying to take the house? I said, I'm not trying to take the house. I just want what's mine. She said, you signed the papers. I said, because Mark lied to me. She said, he didn't lie. You just didn't read them. And that's not our fault. I sat with that for a long time because she wasn't wrong. Not completely. I didn't read the papers. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. But that didn't make what they did right. That didn't make it okay to steal from your mother, to use her money and her labor and her love, and then throw her away like trash. I said, Lauren, I will always love you, but I won't let you do this. And she hung up. That was the last time I heard her voice for 4 months. The court date came in May, a Tuesday, raining. I wore the only good dress I had left, a black one, the one I wore to Richard's funeral. I took the bus to the courthouse because I couldn't afford a parking spot. I sat in the hallway on a hard wooden bench. Margaret arrived with a briefcase. She looked tired. She said, they offered a settlement.
$10,000. Take it and walk away. I said the house is worth $400,000. I co-signed for $250,000. I paid $40,000 cash. I worked for 3 years without pay. $10,000 is nothing. Margaret said, I know, but judges don't always see it the way we do. I said, I don't care what the judge sees. I care about what's right. We walked into the courtroom. Lauren and Mark were already there. They sat on the other side with their lawyer, a man in an expensive suit. Lauren wouldn't look at me. Mark did. He gave me a sad smile, the same sad smile from the kitchen, the one that made me want to scream. The judge came in, an older woman, hard eyes. She read the papers. She listened to Margaret. She listened to the other lawyer. She asked me questions. Did you know you were taking your name off the deed? I said no. The judge said, did you ask? I said no. The judge said, why not? I said, because I trusted my daughter and my son-in-law. I didn't think they would lie to me. The judge looked at Lauren. Lauren finally looked at me, and I saw something in her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear, or maybe just the realization that this was really happening, that the mother who raised her was sitting in a courtroom asking a stranger to give her back a piece of what she lost. The judge asked Lauren, did you explain the refinancing papers to your mother? Lauren said, Mark handled the finances. The judge asked Mark the same question. Mark said, I explained it as best I could. She's an adult. She's capable of reading what she signs. The judge sat back. She looked at the ceiling. She sighed. Then she made her ruling. She said that while the situation was unfortunate, the plaintiff had signed the documents voluntarily. There was no proof of coercion. The defendants were the legal owners of the property. However, the $40,000 cash contribution was a loan unless proven otherwise. The defendants would be ordered to repay that amount over 5 years with minimal interest. No attorney fees, no punitive damages. The court adjourned. $40,000 over 5 years. That was about $660 a month. Enough to pay my rent. Not enough to buy back my life. Not enough to fix what they broke. I walked out of the courtroom. Margaret put her hand on my arm. She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Don't be. You did your job." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, but I will be." I went outside. The rain had stopped. The sun was coming through the clouds. I sat on the steps of the courthouse. I watched people walk by. Lawyers, jurors, families. People who had their own stories, their own betrayals, their own broken hearts. I thought about how everyone was carrying something, how we all walk around with these secret weights, and how most of us never tell anyone. Lauren and Mark came out a few minutes later. They saw me on the steps. Lauren stopped. Mark put his hand on her back. He said something to her.
I couldn't hear what she shook her head. She walked toward me. She stood about 3 feet away. She said, "Mom." I said, "Lauren." She said, "We'll send the money, the first payment, next month." I said, "Okay." She said, "I'm sorry it came to this." I said, "Me too." Then she walked away. She didn't hug me. She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't say goodbye. She just got in her car with Mark and drove away. And I sat there on the cold, wet steps and watched her taillights disappear around the corner. And I knew I would never have my daughter back. Not the way I wanted. Not the way I remembered. Maybe that daughter never existed. Maybe I made her up in my mind. Maybe I needed to believe that someone loved me that much, that someone wouldn't let me down. That was 2 years ago. I am 70 years old now. I still live in the apartment above Bill's garage. The stove still finicky. The stairs still hard on my knees. The money comes every month, direct deposit. I don't talk to Lauren. I don't talk to Mark. I don't see Addie. I wrote her a letter on her 8th birthday. I don't know if she got it. I don't know if her parents gave it to her. I told her I loved her. I told her none of this was her fault. I told her to be brave and kind, and to never stop asking questions. I put my address on the envelope. I never got a reply. Sometimes I sit by the window and watch the kids play in the street. Sometimes I see a little girl with brown hair like Addie's, and my heart does something funny.
It lunges, like it's trying to jump out of my chest and run to her. But then the girl turns, and it's not Addie. And I remember that Addie is growing up in a house I helped pay for, a house I mopped and dusted and decorated, a house where my photo is probably in a box somewhere, or thrown away. I don't know which is worse. Bill passed away last winter. He left the apartment to me in his will. Small place, bad plumbing, but it's mine. The first thing that's been mine in a long time. I put Richard's photo on the windowsill. I put Addie's drawings on the refrigerator. I watered a small plant, a succulent, hard to kill, like me. I still cry sometimes, at night, when the apartment is dark and the only sound is the refrigerator humming. I cry for the family I thought I had, for the years I can't get back, for the money I worked for the trust I gave away like candy. I cry for Addie, for the granddaughter who will grow up and maybe one day wonder why Grandma stopped coming around. And I hope she asks, because when she asks, somebody will have to tell her the truth. And the truth is that her parents took everything from an old woman who only wanted to love them. I don't hate Lauren. I tried, but I can't. She's my daughter. She came out of my body. I felt her kick inside me. I watched her take her first breath. I taught her how to eat with a spoon and tie her shoes and ride a bike. I stayed up with her when she had fever. I drove her to school every morning for 12 years. I held her when she cried over boys who broke her heart. I walked her down the aisle at her wedding. I was there for everything. And then, one day, I wasn't, because she decided I was in the way. I hate what she did. I hate the person she became. But I can't hate her. That's the curse of being a mother. You can be destroyed by your child and still love them, still wish them well, still check the phone to see if they called. The phone never rings. Sometimes I think about what Mark said that morning. A few days after our wedding, my son-in-law suddenly said that the best wedding gift would be if you disappeared from my house. And then I left. I did disappear. Not because he asked, because I finally realized that I had been a ghost for years. A ghost they kept around because I was useful, because I cooked and cleaned and babysat and paid bills. The moment I stopped being useful, the moment I needed help carrying the laundry basket, they wanted me gone. And that is the most devastating thing I have ever learned about love. That sometimes it's not love at all. Sometimes it's just transaction, and you don't find out until you have nothing left to give. So here I am, 70 years old,